Hello, my name is Marion Devine. It's a pleasure to welcome you to this edition of Off the Shelf, and this is a book discussion series that's brought to you by the Conference Board, so welcome today. And I will be sitting down with Alexia Michiels, who's author of The Resilience Drive, a book that's been published by Favre. So welcome, Alexia, today.
Thank you very much, Marion.
So Alexia is co-founder of the Resilience Institute Europe, and this is part of the Resilience Institute. You may have come across them. They publish a very interesting and large study of resilience, and this is evidence-based research. And they have developed a model of resilience and a diagnostic tool as well, and it's very much based around individual resilience. So Alexia, I know that you changed career, but you do have a corporate background. So was that quite a big change for you to go from that into research? What sort of led you to make that change?
Of course, it was a big change. I worked many years for Procter & Gamble and then for the World Federation of Advertisers. And I moved to China in 2005, and I lived there with my husband and my children for 5 years. And this is where I decided to change career and join the Resilience Institute.
And what is it about resilience that really, made you sort of focus on that and write the book?
I realized in China that there are different ways of looking at things. And I was very much impressed by the way Chinese people tend to apprehend people and situation in a much more holistic view, but although with more nuance. It's like less contrast in terms of how they do manage various situations. And I became also very interested in understanding better the interactions between body, heart, mind, and spirit, and how science can help us understand that better in a very pragmatic way.
Great. And I think, given that you yourself were familiar with corporate life and you work now with individuals and companies, do you think that corporate life has become more stressful, that there is a greater need for resilience among the workforce today?
I guess there has always been a certain level of stress in the corporate life, but I tend to believe that pressure has increased, the rhythm of life, the rhythm of work has increased, and the expectations of people have changed. The World Economic Forum has just mentioned this week in Davos how important it is now to make leaders think more responsibly about their leadership responsibilities, to look at how we can manage work in a more sustainable way, and to kind of relook at capitalism so that human can be at the heart of the apprehension of capitalism. So there is definitely more at stake. And of course, the environmental challenges is just one more element to take into account. So that adds a lot of the pressure for leaders, for sure.
Yeah. And so I mean, that's a very big scoping of where resilience fits in our current economy, and of course we're heading towards the fourth industrial revolution, if not in it. And so just thinking about millennials, I mean, at the Conference Board we do work on well-being and mental health, and I know there is some evidence saying that millennials are in general a more stressed generation. Is that something that you're seeing?
What we are seeing, and that came out of our research, is that resilience tend to improve with age and with experience, which is a good news for all of us. But that explains why young professionals tend to lack resilience. They really need to proactively develop their resilience competences, and this is especially important in a context where indeed pressure is really high. So I totally believe that there would be a great benefit in including more resilience training, not just in companies, but ideally in schools and in universities, so that young professionals feel well equipped, not simply to apprehend challenges, but also to enjoy life, to have the courage to embrace the challenges they encounter at work and radiate positively around them. So I totally believe that building resilience competences should be something to pay attention to earlier in life.
And I guess that leads to really a very, very important question. How are you defining resilience?
That's certainly a very important question indeed. Now, resilience originally comes from physics, and that relates to the ability of a material to maintain its original shape despite pressure. Now, from there, it was then used in therapy. And in therapy, it refers to the ability to bounce back from traumas, from dramas. Now, in our approach, we are not therapists. We look at resilience as the ability to bounce back, not just from traumas, but also from daily adversity, from daily challenges. But it also relates to the ability of growing through the challenges, embracing the opportunities with courage, with enthusiasm. It's also about connecting to yourself, having a positive impact on others, being conscious about the impact you have on the environment. So as you can see, it goes beyond bouncing back from adversity.
And I think as well, Alexia, that your vision for resilience and the definition that you work to is it's something that can be learned and improved. It's not an inherent characteristic as such.
It is a debate indeed. Some people say, it is innate. Some others will say it is totally learned. We do believe that there are indeed some people who tend to be more resilient naturally. That's for sure. But we have observed and experienced that you can absolutely train your personal resilience. You can build collective resilience as well. So the idea would be really to focus on these competences that you can cultivate and improve.
Excellent, thank you. Well, just to give a brief description of the book, it's The Resilience Drive. It's from my point of view, I found it's a very accessible book that you can dip into, and it has 100 simple practices to help people navigate the daily challenges in their life. So it's got 5 sections, a section on staying calm and to rejuvenate, section on stimulating your vitality, a section on engaging your emotions, the 4th one, training your mind, and the 5th one, spirit in action. Could you just tell us a little bit about those headings before we talk in more detail?
We do believe that resilience relates to the ability of managing well all of your resources. Not just the brain, because usually we are very much in the head, but also your body, your heart, yes, the mind, but also the spirit. So the book is divided indeed in 5 parts. One relates more to the ability to cope with pressure, the importance to create calm through simple strategies. The second one is more about your body, your physical vitality, and that includes tips about managing your sleep better, how nutrition can impact your overall level of energy, but also your ability to concentrate, to focus. It also includes quite a lot about sleep, which I think is a real challenge nowadays for most leaders. The third part is about engaging emotions. We know that emotions do play a role in the corporate world. Beyond the atmosphere in your team, it impacts as well the ability to be creative, to be collaborative. We know from positive psychology that emotions have a signature. And if we understand that better, as a leader, you can stimulate
what do you mean
more positive emotions.
What do you mean signature?
A signature is a way to express that emotions do not happen exclusively in your heart. It impacts more than your mood or the atmosphere in your team. Emotions that you experience will impact as well your physiology. So various emotions will lead to different physiological responses. It will also impact your mind, your ability to think creatively, your ability to concentrate, to focus. If you start a meeting being frustrated, angry, sad, or depressed, your ability to contribute during that meeting will certainly be affected. And reversely, if you start a meeting feeling serene, joyful, grateful, you will probably contribute in that meeting in a much more constructive way. This is what we call the signature of an emotion.
I see.
And the 4th part is about the cognitive dimension, training the mind. In a world where we tend to be overwhelmed by information, we need more self-discipline than it was the case 30 years ago to maintain some mental clarity. And there are various strategies to help us maintain clarity and train that ability to concentrate and focus. And then the last part is about what we call spirit in action. And spirit has nothing to do in our approach with religion, but it's about relating to your values, to the meaning of your choices, and how we can actually be driven by the values that are dear to our heart.
And I guess, in the workplace, we often talk about that as being authentic, and authentic leadership, which has become a very, very important concept. Yeah.
And I would say that resilient leadership is authentic leadership, because resilient leaders, they know themselves well and they manage their interactions consciously.
Brilliant, thank you. So within the book, I think that you base a lot of your the practices around what you call the resilience spiral. And I know we haven't got a visual, but could you talk us through the resilience spiral as best you can?
As we can imagine, the spiral is vertical. And it's a reminder that from time to time, it is interesting to stop and reflect with a more vertical view about, okay, where do we stand here? How do I feel myself? How is my team these days? And the spiral reminds us as well that it's okay to have up and down. And training your resilience, you become much more flexible in your ability to navigate across this spiral with more ease and more success. So resilience is not about being happy all the time. It's not about being at the top of the spiral all the time. It's about being able to go up and down, to be flexible, to make sure you do not feel stuck in this negative spiral, but that you really have in yourself the strength and the strategies to not only bounce back, but also enjoy the more positive part of the spiral and have a positive impact on people around you.
Great, thank you. So I think that when you were doing the research for this book, and I know the spiral is something that has been developed by the Resilience Institute. I think you said that epigenetics is really shaping now thoughts about resilience. So I thought that sounds really interesting, and perhaps you could tell us a little bit more about that.
I'm really convinced that what matters a lot is how we do behave. It's not so much about concept or theory. I'm not trying to convince people to adhere to some ideas. I'm trying to create enthusiasm, to translate some concept into behaviors. I totally believe that the way you live your days defines very much the way you live your life. And as we know indeed from epigenetics, it's now proven that your behaviors, your habits may well influence not just your personal experience, but as well the expression of your genes. And I find it extremely empowering because it shows that the environment where you live and your behaviors may actually lead to the expression of some genes, or actually modulate the expression of some genes.
So the more you practice it, the more you behave it, the more you will become it. Is that the sort of implication?
That's
there?
correct, and it shows that if you believe in health, if you believe in changing some natural trends through your behavior, through your habits, at some point you may well get there. So I believe a lot in practice, in habits, in defining a routine that works for you, while respecting that what works for me may not work for you. And I think there are sufficiently useful practices that anyone can pick from to, at the end of the day, find something that works within your context and that resonates with you.
Okay, lovely. So now we're just going to take a short break for some quick announcements, and we will be back in just a minute to continue this really interesting conversation with Alexia Michiels, who is author of The Resilience Drive.
Looking for additional business insights in this subject area and beyond this podcast? Go to tcb.org/EU and explore our Economy, Strategy and Finance Centre. Uncover a large array of products hosted by the Conference Board in focus areas like global economy, labour markets and many others. Products include peer-to-peer networking events, expert briefings, publications, data and analysis, webcasts, videos and blogs.
So hello and welcome back to our conversation with Alexia Michiels on the book she wrote, The Resilience Drive. Welcome back. So I think now we're just going to drill down a little bit into the book and some of the specific practices that are flagged up. Obviously, as we said earlier, there are several sections in the book. And Alexia, it'd be very interesting to ask you, what would you particularly emphasise to anyone who is listening today and who is thinking about their own resilience and where they start?
I think starting by reflecting about it is a good starting point. So asking yourself a few questions, stop and reflect is always good. Considering the audience, I think it's worthwhile being well aware that in a busy agenda, we tend to work non-stop. And very often people put as many things as they can in one single day. When you look at the sport world, what do the top athletes to make sure they reach high performance in a sustainable way? They incorporate in their plan regular rejuvenation because they know that this is a condition to maintain a very high level of performance. I observe that in the corporate world, this is not applied enough. So I would actually encourage leaders to consider rejuvenation as a must. Finding ways to integrate in their daily routine quick, smart and effective rejuvenation. And it does not have to take hours, but finding a few minutes to rejuvenate may well be a condition to maintain high level of performance. So that's an example.
So what would you actually do then if you were trying to rejuvenate?
Two simple suggestions come to my mind. One is about understanding the power of breathing. And I would specify more breathing out. We know that when we breathe out, we do activate in the brain the parasympathetic system, which is in charge of relaxation. So I would encourage everyone in the audience from time to time to stop and breathe out a little bit longer, trusting that that will calm the system, therefore calm your mind and help you to cope with the rest of the day. Another one would be to take more regular micro breaks. In Stanford University, they confirmed that when we work non-stop for more than 50 minutes, we may not realize it, but the level of concentration starts declining. If you take a micro break as short as 30 seconds or 1 minute, you may well prevent that attention drop. So this is also an invitation for anyone listening to take more regular micro breaks during the day.
And in terms of stimulating your vitality, work can be very exhausting. Pressure can be very exhausting. What would you flag up here?
And of course, I would flag the obvious, which is pay attention to what you eat, exercise a minimum, and sleep well. But at this moment, I'm especially passionate about sleep. I do believe that many of us do not sleep well enough. And there is a strong level of evidence that sleeping well is beneficial for every one of your organs. And if you do not get a good sleep, it also unfortunately affects negatively all of your organs. It affects as well your ability to perform and to cope with daily pressure. So I would encourage everyone to look at how you sleep and make sure that you have a sleeping routine that optimizes the chances of having a restorative sleep. And I would just maybe flag one simple practice. We know that about 30% of people will be on screen just before going to bed, whether it is on your iPad, on your iPhone. And research has shown that 1 hour of screen time before going to bed postpones by 3 hours the release of melatonin, which is the sleep inducer hormone. So that will not only influence your ability to fall asleep easily, but actually even the quality of your night will be affected, because the research could also show that the quantity of melatonin would be about 50% lower when you have spent about an hour on screen before going to bed. So for those struggling a bit with sleep, I would really highly recommend to experiment avoiding screens at least an hour before going to bed. And just observe, how does that affect your ability to have a restorative sleep? They might well be very much impressed how that simple practice may really change your sleep experience.
Do you think there's an optimal length of time to sleep?
The science says that as human beings, we should all get between 6 and 8 hours of sleep. If you get less than 6 hours, or actually more than 8 hours, it might be detrimental to our health. Now, some people say that they manage really well with less hours of sleep. More recent research shows that only a very marginal percentage of the global population, 1 to 2%, can function properly with less hours of sleep. So it might well be you, but there is a high probability you're like anyone else, and actually you need 6 to 8 hours of sleep.
Well, I to be honest, I think it's great to be hearing scientists and specialists all across the board giving people permission to sleep. I think, you know, to me that's a great message. And then in your book as well, you've got a section on training your mind. What do you mean there? Again, what would you flag up?
This is probably the most challenging. It is the most challenging for me because this is all about being present, focused, and feeling clear in your mind. And as we are, as I mentioned earlier, overwhelmed by information, it requires a special effort to clear out your mind and being able to really focus. You mentioned the research that we did. Indeed, in the research we conducted to analyze lots of data that we accumulated through an online tool that we have. It's called the Resilience Diagnostic. With more than 20,000 diagnostics, we could analyze lots of data and find out what are the factors that differentiate the most the resilient leaders from those who are less resilient. And it appears that one of the most important factors is the ability to focus. And the ability to focus relates to your ability to be in the present moment, to not let yourself be distracted. And I think it requires special effort. It requires regular practice to bring your attention to the present moment. Some people call this mindfulness, meditation, centering exercise. That may well work for some people. If it does not work for you, take just 1 minute and focus on one single thing, whether it is your breath or whether it is something you're looking at, but it is a way to train your ability to focus. So training the mind includes training your ability to focus and be present.
And a final question around your book is, how would you recommend people to use it? I mean, 100 practices could seem quite overwhelming. You know, how do you envisage that people should use it?
I would certainly not recommend to start following these 100 practices. That would certainly be overwhelming. The idea of the book is to create enthusiasm, to show how science puts light on what most people would say is common sense. But the good news is that now we can understand why the common sense makes sense. I would recommend people to look at it and to define, okay, what is it that would benefit me the most, and choose just one single practice. Experiment, and then find out for yourself, how does that help you? And then step by step, have that project of building your resilience, trusting that when you build your own resilience, it can also indirectly benefit people living with you and working with you.
And I guess what you're talking about as well is forming new habits, which for all of us is quite hard.
Absolutely. So simple steps that you would do regularly so that it becomes a habit. And when it is a habit, you can then consider adding another one and then another one. At the end of the day, the idea would be just to be well conscious about your routine and define what are the habits that work well for me, that serve me, and make sure that those habits that do not serve you are not too much part of your days.
Yeah. Great, thank you. Well, in this last few minutes of this podcast, we do like to ask our authors about their own reading habits and what they do when they are de-stressing or rejuvenating. So can you tell us a little bit about what you're reading now?
Of course, I read a lot, but I read extremely slowly because I read in my bed in the evening and I tend to be exhausted at night, so after a few pages I have to fall asleep. But I always have lots of books on my bedside table. So I mentioned sleep. I have just finished this fascinating book from Matthew Walker, who is a neuroscientist, and the name of the book is Why We Sleep. I highly recommend it. It's accessible and extremely interesting. My favorite book of all times, I would say, is a book from Viktor Frankl called Man's Search for Meaning. And I read that book 15 years ago, and that clearly led me to change my career and define what I really want to do with my life. So a fantastic book that was written in 1946, just after the war. And then I recently finished 2 books from an author from Iceland. Her name is difficult to pronounce for me. Her name is Ólafsdóttir. And the names of the books are Rosa Candida and Miss Iceland. Fiction books, very nice tone and very light reading that I enjoyed very much.
Oh, that's a great combination of books. Brilliant, thank you. Well, we're just about out of time now, and Alexia, thank you so much for sharing with us about your research into resilience. If you enjoyed this episode, please do remember to subscribe to our off-the-shelf book discussion podcast series, and you can explore the entire catalogue of our podcast programmes on our website at the Conference Board, or through the usual platforms like iTunes, Google Play or Spotify. So Alexia, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Mariam.